Welcome everyone to interview number 6 of OC Improvement Month. Today with Jakson. Yeah, let's go.
Hello.
What's up? So, just for anyone who may not be familiar with you, could you just give a brief introduction to who you are in the community and what people probably know you for?
Right. So, for those of you who don't know, I am Jakson. You might have seen my speed plays before, or my recent performances in tournaments, or maybe just as the guy with the sun profile picture. But I'm a top 200 speed player, and I've been in the OSU scene for just over 5 years now.
Before I start asking actual questions, I'm curious the story of your sun avatar because it's very prominent. It's very branded.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of random. It started as it was actually in an emote in a small server, small private Discord server I was in, and we would always like use it in a lot of situations when like posting scores and whatnot. And
Oh,
I thought it was just funny to put it as my profile picture, and then for some reason it kind of just stuck, and now it's kind of my brand, I guess.
I see. Yeah, it definitely did stick. I think you rock it pretty well. Let's go.
Yeah, it's definitely. I think a lot of people recognize me by just the profile picture now, which is just kind of cool.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, I'll be honest. Like, it looks really cool on your profile with like your banner. It's just something
Oh
about it.
yeah,
It's just like this is like Sunland. Maybe that's
yeah.
just
I
me.
I, I just kind of randomly like made that one day using just a couple of like pre-made assets on a website, and I was like, oh, this is actually pretty cool.
Yeah, let's go. So I think aside from the sun avatar, I think second biggest thing that you're known for is probably speed. There's a question that came in on the forum where someone asked to Jackson, what kinds of maps did you play to improve your speed and stamina over 230 BPM?
Right. So I've been grinding, streams and speed for as long as I can remember, pretty much since I started playing about 5 years ago. Um, I would say when it comes to, when I start getting higher BPM, I think I try to do my best to kind of keep like a good balance between different kinds of speed, because I try to practice, variety between, long streams and then also bursts, and then a lot of finger control too, because I think finger control is actually a really important aspect of speed. Um, because I think a lot of people can kind of just shred when it comes to fast streams, but I think to me it's actually more important to have a lot of control over your speed and consistency. So that's kind of something I shoot for, is a lot more kind of stuff I can be consistent at. So if if I can death stream 240 but not 250, then I'll practice a lot of 240 to make sure I've got that down pat. If I go too high to a point where I'm getting 80, 90, even sometimes like low 90s accuracy, I actually like to practice a little bit under that a lot of times to kind of solidify like my kind of accuracy and consistency on that.
So it sounds like you try to really round off a certain BPM before you move up, and it's like a very gradual process.
Yeah, I think that's definitely what I went for. I would say when I started, it was a lot of like pushing, because I think when I started, it was a lot more of like trying to go as like far as I possibly could. I would be playing maybe like 20, 30 BPM higher than I probably should be. I was getting like 80 to 90% accuracy on maps. And I think that in some ways that helped me, in some ways it doesn't. And I think that's also why I more focus on solidifying now, is because I think when you do too much of that, like just the raw skill cap pushing, not the consistency part, then you kind of are lacking in that. And then a lot of people who can stream like 280 have are lacking accuracy in any lower BPM as well, because they haven't really solidified that.
Oh yeah, that definitely makes sense. I think aside from like the variety that you have, it sounds like you're pretty good at finding different kinds of maps? Is there like certain strategies you use? Because I think a lot of people might hear that and be like, yeah, that would be nice, but where do I find such a variety of maps anyway? So do you have any, I guess, strategies for finding those kinds of maps?
Um, I would say it's definitely built up over time is probably the biggest aspect of, throughout just all the ranked maps that I've downloaded and played over the years. I mean, obviously, a good idea is to make collections for these kinds of things. Whenever you find a map that you're like, oh, this tests my long stream skill, or if you're like, oh, this tests this BPM at these kinds of patterns, I'd say it's a really good idea to have collections like that and add to them as much as you encounter them. I would say also uh, something that's definitely actually had some good findings in terms of speed maps are because I've played in a lot of tournaments in the past year or so. I've found that a lot of speed tournament maps are actually really useful for the kind of way I practice. So a lot of if it's like no mod twos and no mod fives and the DT pools, those kinds of things are have been generally really good for practice. So I think if you look for a lot of if you look through a lot of just a lot of map pools and tournaments, and since there's a whole range of difficulties, I think that's a pretty good place to find some good ones.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I will shout out since I think this is relevant, but to anyone listening who wants to find these like map pool databases, I have a couple linked at the top of my OSU user page at Digital Hypno. So I think that's probably the most convenient place to find them, which is why I put them there. But yeah, I definitely agree that the thing with tournaments, they try to have a wide variety and they also try to pick maps that are of decent quality. And so, yeah, you definitely end up with a really, really nice array of maps. Do you have experience with, I guess, or how often do you play multiplayer as well? Because I know that's something that a lot of people, especially speed players, for some reason, it's like a lot of people do like like speed multi lobbies with their other speed friends.
Right. Yeah. I would say I usually don't like I do get occasionally like invited to lobbies, and that's pretty much the only time I'll play just multis is a lot of like kind of top player lobbies. Um, and I think it isn't very often where I play multis that are speed oriented. It's more like a really wide variety of maps. So I have found a decent number of good speed maps through multi, but I'd say it's definitely not like it's not been a consistently like good facet to find speed maps in.
Oh, okay, I see. So I think the other thing I'm curious about with maps is things like OSU Trainer or like rate changers for maps. Is that something that you've used often or that you find value in?
Um, I remember trying a rate changer once. To me, it hasn't really come into play very often. I think I have a wide enough variety of maps where if I want to practice, some kind of pattern or some kind of BPM, then I look through my maps to try to find a map like that. I definitely think there's merit in it if say you want to practice a specific pattern, but maybe it's a little bit too slow, a little bit too fast. I think it's a useful tool, but I haven't personally used it much.
Okay, yeah, I think I'm somewhat in the same boat where, yeah, I think if you have enough songs in your song list, but yeah, I definitely agree with how you worded it. So, in a more general sense, do you have like, okay, I guess two questions. One is, what's like the biggest recommendation you have for pushing yourself in general? Like, you could relate it to speed or really just anything in general. And then also like common pitfalls that you often see.
Um, I think one thing that people do is they kind of, and I've done this myself. You can get kind of too tunnel visioned in terms of improvement, where maybe it's you're stuck on a specific skill set, or you're stuck just maybe in general on the mindset of what improvement is. Uh, but I think it's a good idea to a lot of times not focus too specifically on things. Um, like when it comes to, maybe speed, if you're like, oh, I'm not improving, my speed isn't showing improvements, then look at other aspects of your gameplay and think like, are there other things that I'm improving on? And kind of apply that mindset, because I think it's a bad idea to always feel like, oh, I'm just stuck, I'm not improving, nothing is working out for me, because I think there's a lot of aspects of the game to focus on.
Okay, that's actually a really good point. I think you often find players like when they're stuck trying to improve at a skill, chances are there's actually something else that's holding you back that you've either been neglecting or haven't even realized. So,
Right.
yeah, that's definitely a very, very good point. So, are there like, trying to think of how to put this question. So, what are like the biggest, yeah, what are the biggest like yes things to do, or like the biggest like thumbs up or biggest recommendations that you have for people trying to learn speed?
Trying to learn speed. I would say that for me, when it comes to my situation, I think long sessions have helped me a lot. Of course, you want to obviously take breaks and make sure your hand's not in pain or anything like that, because that encounters more like real, tangible physical problems.
All right.
But I think it's honestly like for me, it takes a long time in a session for me to kind of get to the point where I'm really working on my speed. I know some people like myself take a long time to warm up. So I think something to do is, if you, as long as you're not, feeling bad in your hands about it, I think like longer sessions was actually a really good thing
Ah, I
for
see.
speed.
So like basically giving yourself a lot of time to warm up. Do you have a sort of routine or like general blueprint or structure to what your warm up usually looks like?
Um, I usually I usually try to start with I usually try to start with stuff that isn't really speed at first, which sounds kind of weird, but I'll usually do stuff that's a lot of, if I want to eventually during a session do, 260, 270 BPM, I'll usually actually start with a lot of maps that are maybe in the 200 to 220 range, and maybe a lot of longer streams, a lot more stamina stuff, because I feel like going straight into a lot of the high BPM stuff actually is detrimental to how I warm up, and it's actually easier for me to hit higher BPMs later in a session if I start with stuff that's a lot lower.
Ah, I see. Yeah, I feel like that, especially if you do it on longer streams, it can definitely help. Well, I guess two things. One, it kind of gets you to loosen out your fingers without feeling
Right.
like you need to push yourself too much. But also, I think by balancing your session that way, because earlier you were talking about how you don't want to kind of tunnel vision on higher BPM,
Hmm.
and warming up with stuff that's a lot lower for you can actually help a lot with getting that balance in your skill set so that you're not tunnel vision too much.
Yeah, for sure.
So, this question can apply to any skill set, but are there any sort of mistakes that you feel like you made, or like sort of roadblocks you feel like you've hit when training a certain skill? And I guess any wisdom you can give so that people don't run into the same issues you did.
Um, I've definitely gotten into a lot of like ruts over the years where I'll be kind of laser focused on something, and I'll kind of start spiraling into this kind of like negative view of that practice, where it because it doesn't feel like I'm improving in something, I start to feel like negatively about, myself, my performance, which, you know affects my mental negatively, and then I almost expect myself to not improve anymore. So I think that's something I've definitely struggled with over time, is kind of like my perspective of my own efforts, and thinking like, oh, I haven't improved, so maybe it's just useless. And so even though I keep on practicing, I start thinking in my mind that I'm not going to even improve, which is obviously then at that point it's gonna be significantly harder to improve at all.
Right. Do you feel like it becomes self-fulfilling at that point
Yeah,
sometimes?
I think so in a way. Um, and I don't think like mental is always 100% correlated to your performance, because I there's definitely people who have bad mentalities who can play really well, and people with good mentalities who don't see improvement at all. But I do definitely think when you kind of get into like this cycle of this kind of expectation of this cycle, then it's definitely, it kind of gets you trapped. I do think so.
Are there any, I guess, mental strategies that you've used to either get yourself out of those situations or try to make sure those that you don't really end up there in the first place?
Something I think is pretty underrated are a lot of other facets of the games, which are, I've done a lot of. There's a lot of like other parts of the game that are kind of fun, and they're kind of like act as very really good like mental refreshers. Things like metal farming, score farming, playing in multis, like we said earlier. Like a lot of those things are good, like almost distractions from the kind of like mental spiraling that can happen from the kind of like laser focused kind of mentality. I think it's good
Oh,
to kind of like, it's a game. It's meant to be fun. There's meant to be relaxing parts of it. So I think it's good to kind of almost unwind in the game itself.
dang, that's actually a really good point. Those sorts of like taking a break without taking a break, or like taking a break from the grind of pushing yourself without like neglecting the game as a whole.
Right. Yeah.
So, aside from tapping speed, which I think we've covered a good amount, I think there's also reading speed or high AR. Are there any tips that you have for people trying to break into higher ARs, like AR 10 or even like 10.3 and just higher AR in general?
Um. Well, one that's not exactly an improvement thing is the obvious choice of gamma, which I have used. I would say that I've used gamma uh, mainly in tournaments, and I can explain that in a bit. But yeah, gamma is one thing. Um, I would say, I don't know. I mean, for me, it was just kind of I played. I think I played a lot of AR-10 kind of to start. Even kind of in the first couple years of a playing, because I would play a lot of stuff above my skill cap, kind of. So a lot of it would end up being like AR-10 and whatnot. So I think it was just kind of ingrained after a while that I could read AR-10, and I think when I started to read above AR-10 was when I got a when I got like an actual PC, because what I was using was like an old laptop with high latency,
Oh
low
God.
FPS, and I think that almost, I don't know if it was both a mental block and like a peripheral block, but before then I definitely was not able to read anything above 10. Um, and I kind of pushed past that block once I started using a better setup, you know. But then it's probably also the fact that I started practicing it a lot more at that point.
Did you break into AR-10 with Hard Rock or with 8.5 DT, or did you find like no mod maps that were AR-10?
I think the biggest one was just Nomad AR-10, because I think in the first couple years that I played, I didn't really mess with mods almost at all. Um, Besides like a very small amount of Hard Rock and a little bit of DT, I was pretty much a no mod only player for the first maybe 2 years of my play. So I'd say my first AR-10 exposure was just a lot of no mod AR-10s.
And I assume those were those like unranked maps, like R-list maps,
Yes,
things like that.
definitely a lot of unranked RLs, yeah, those types of maps.
So that's interesting. I mean, a lot of what I'm hearing so far is that a lot of this was sort of a slow build up, like very gradual over like the entire time that you've been playing. And I think it's especially I think the most impressive has been like what seems like your ability to really push past certain barriers where you feel like you're at a wall and still keep practicing even if you feel like it's not really getting you anywhere. So I
Mhm.
think that if nothing else is sort of a like hidden message that I'm taking out of like all the answers that you've given combined.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So you mentioned Gamma and specifically for tournaments. So for those who might not be familiar, well, I guess I can quickly explain. Gamma is basically it can make your screen a little brighter or a little slower or a little darker. And so circles typically in the actual game, they fade in. And so when you increase your gamma to make the screen brighter, it makes that fade in basically happen faster. And so the circles appear to show up a little sooner. So when we say gamma, that's basically what we mean. So can you talk about like why or like why exactly you reserve it specifically for tournaments, or is there like a specific reason for that?
Yeah, there is. So I mentioned how once I got a better PC, I started practicing a lot more above AR10, and obviously this was mostly with DT, and from that point, really, I started using hidden with DT, and that's pretty much what I mained throughout all of my solo play. Anytime I would play anything above AR10 with DT, it would always be with hidden. Um, and this was kind of forced to change once I started playing tournaments because, as you probably know, most tournaments, the DT pools, you're not allowed to take hidden as an option. Um, so when I first started tournaments, I actually struggled to read anything with DT that was above AR10 because I could not read it with DT only.
Ah,
Um, so I kind of just I got into the habit of using Gamma on DT only in tournaments because that was the best way for me to read them in that setting. And I think I think it's a little bit of a regret I have that I've never really practiced much DT only high AR because it's definitely it can be detrimental at some point, but it has worked out for me thus far.
yeah, I think there's this interesting balance between like wanting to add hidden in solo and wanting to not add it for tournaments. So yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So basically, what I'm hearing is that like in tournaments, like you're pretty comfortable reading without hidden if it's a lower AR. So turning up the gamma for you basically like makes it seem that way artificially. Basically,
Right. Yeah.
I see.
Mostly. Yeah.
So in a more general sense, are there any strategies you use to prepare for tournament matches?
Um. Usually, I set aside enough time that I think I can kind of warm up to a generally a position that I would be in if I was playing solo. So probably somewhere like maybe anywhere between half an hour to an hour of warming up before like a tournament would be the amount of time that I probably take before a match. And usually it's like a whole variety of skill sets because I do have to often play stuff besides just speed. But I would also say that practicing for tournaments, I make sure to put a lot of speed practice in those like 30 minutes just because it's I have to be warm for it and be prepared for it,
Right, right. Uh,
and
Um,
also stay hydrated.
oh, true. That's I think the best advice so far. Do you? I'm actually curious to go back all the way to the beginning because it seems like you were always interested in pushing speed as a player. Were there any like early inspirations or just any general motivations for why you chose speed as the skill set to get better at?
um I would say like at the beginning it was kind of just like a self-fulfilling thing because I just ended up any time I would play streams, something like it just felt better. It was it felt I mean it felt like the most fun way to enjoy the game at the time. Obviously for the first like for the first couple months I couldn't really stream at all. Most people can't, but I don't know. Once I kind of discovered it, it was kind of just it was really fun to do that and improve. Eventually, there were a couple people that I looked up to. Eventually, people like Arison and Ryuke. Those were definitely like big speed inspirations for me. But I would say it kind of just started as oh, these patterns are fun, so I think I'll just keep playing them and get better at them.
Oh, I see. So yes, uh, I'm actually curious to ask kind of the opposite question as well, because I'm sure there's some skill sets, especially for tournaments, that you kind of feel obligated to practice that might not be as fun. Are there any ways that you sort of stay motivated, or just general strategies for practicing those skill sets, even if they aren't the most fun for you?
Um, I would say it's similar to the way that kind of doing different things in the game to kind of refresh your mindset is because because I'm like a speed player, I'm often most of the time in slots for speed in tournaments. And I think practicing kind of other skill sets part of the tournament are kind of good mental refreshers in between those practices. And at the same time, it's good because I'm getting practice on those skill sets for the tournament as well.
Ah, I see. So it's kind of like a double
Yeah, it's
sided
like a
practice.
it's like a refresh for speed, and it helps because it's practicing skill sets for tournament play.
Okay, I see. So tournaments are basically your way to you're almost in a sense obligated to practice those, but it's also like it feels more productive than just kind of playing them on your own volition.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
So a question came in from Hello Naoya who asks, question for Jakson, how do you improve low BPM around 180 BPM stamina if you can't do it for even a few seconds?
So I think that the lower you go in BPM, almost the less you're utilizing kind of what you'd usually imagine as like a streaming skill. I think when you get to around 180 BPM and lower, it utilizes I think a lot more rhythm aspect and a lot more finger control, and almost to a point like kind of like the alternating skill. Um, Let me think about this for a sec.
No, you're good. You're good. That's really a good point because I feel like a lot of people find that they use slightly different techniques, even if it feels mostly the same inherently. Some people do use slightly different techniques for lower BPM versus higher BPM.
Right. I would also say I do feel that it a lot of low BPM, even as low as like here, like 180. Um, I actually do tend to have stamina drain pretty heavily over time, even with these low BPMs. And in a sense, there are times when it feels even more kind of draining than faster BPM. And I think that could be for a variety of reasons. Like I said, because there's more like actual like rhythm and finger control involved. I think I often might tap harder on slower BPM. I might apply more focus to my tapping hand through that. So I think that lower BPMs are actually can be just as hard to stream stamina wise as higher ones because of that.
If someone is trying to break in, let's say someone is like relatively new to pushing their speed and they're mostly getting capped, such as this person around like 180 BPM, do you feel like they should try pushing gradually up from those lower BPMs before they start breaking into speed stuff? Because it seems like there's almost like different skill sets in a sense. Like it almost sounds like there's different, like almost slightly different techniques or ways that you think about these different BPMs. So would you recommend someone sort of master these lower BPMs first before pushing past it?
Um, I think it's a good idea to kind of at least like experiment with both because because I do think definitely both of them have their own merits to practicing. Um, like if you've already like tested or tried to see if you can go higher BPM as well, and you can't do that either, then I would say definitely like doing starting with lower BPM is a good idea, and I would suggest trying to kind of find a way, because I think oftentimes the thing is people just using too much strength or stamina for slower ones because they're focusing on it so much. I think trying to find like a good technique to just maybe tap lighter, maybe different hand positions. But I think definitely starting lower is a good idea, at least until you think you can push higher.
Are there any mistakes that you've noticed people make, or like even just common questions that you've encountered over the years, especially for people who kind of feel like they're at a speed barrier?
Um, it's kind of hard because it is very like there's like everyone has their own kind of personal journey with speed and whatnot. But I mean, in terms of mistakes, uh, I don't know. I mean, I definitely think that you should be careful when it comes to pushing. I think you should be careful on either spectrum, whether it's pushing that pushing BPMs that are too fast versus ones that are really slow. Because, like I said, a lot of slow BPMs are pretty hard, and I feel like I've seen a lot of people, struggle more and more the more like lower BPM they go, and I think sometimes some people, obviously not everyone, some people kind of mistake that for not having the physical capability to go faster, so they keep going lower. I don't think that's always the solution, is to keep going lower and lower until you feel like, oh, I can do this BPM. I think it's good to kind of I think it's good to have a range, really. It's good to practice, like even if you struggle on pretty low BPM, I think it's good to still try to practice a whole variety of BPMs. Obviously not like, 100 above what you feel like you can't do, but
uh, yeah, that's actually a really good point. I think a lot of people kind of feel like they have to start from like super, super low and just build their way up that way. So that's definitely a good point.
right. I will say I think I will give myself the thing that I feel like I had a beginning advantage in terms of speed because I tap with my dominant hand. So I really never practiced, like, other than maybe like a couple weeks when I was like, trying to start out. I never really practiced stuff that was like below 200.
Oh,
I think that like it's had its benefits and its cons, because obviously my finger control wasn't very good, but I think it helped in my pushing of speed, that I kind of just I pushed a lot of speed at the beginning, even when I wasn't that great at it. I think I think it's good to practice, at least sometimes, higher stuff that you feel like you can't do. But I think some people would be surprised at progress they'd have if they tried higher stuff.
oh yeah, that I definitely agree with that. So that's interesting. So you're playing with tablet, I'm pretty sure. So I assume you're aiming with aiming with right hand. Is there a story to your play
No,
style?
so I play tablet left-handed. So
Oh,
aim left hand, type right hand. But I am right-handed.
okay.
Um, the reason for this kind of little backstory is that, um, kind of just when I was growing up, I ended up naturally writing with my left hand, and yet I would do pretty much everything else with my right hand. So when it came to using tablet, because it's shaped like a pen and I would hold it like a pen, it was immediately more natural to hold it with my left hand, because that's how I hold writing utensils.
Oh, that's actually really interesting. So when you started, did you play mouse at all?
It m- my experience with mouse probably lasted like 2 weeks before I changed to tablet, which is also why I if I try playing mouse, I really can't play anything above 3, maybe 4 stars.
And do you use mouse with your right hand also?
Yes,
Okay, okay,
my I use mouse right-handed. Yes.
okay. So, okay, that's actually very interesting. I didn't know that. So you kind of have like the best of both worlds when it comes to finger dexterity, so to speak.
Right. Yeah. I think it kind of gave me a head start a little bit.
Right, right. Although I think I mentioned in a recent interview that it's like it doesn't really matter. Like people have different starting positions, but it doesn't determine your cap as a player. So
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
someone named Sis asked on the forum, how much would you say hand position and technique matter?
Um. I mean, I would say it makes a big difference, but it is from person to person. It's very dependent on what you feel works best for you. And of course, that's a pretty paper, like
Yeah.
cut answer that a lot of people give, but it is true. It is very just dependent on the person. But I do think that it is important to find one that works really well for you. And if you're feeling obviously this isn't a solution to improvement, but if you're feeling like something about your grip isn't working out, then I do think that like changing things fairly often is actually a positive.
Oh, interesting. Could you elaborate on that a little? I guess my thoughts are that I think it's healthy to have like phases of experimentation, and then after you kind of exit that phase and learn a bit more about yourself as a player, then you kind of pick whatever like play style felt the most comfortable for you, and you start kind of exiting that experimentation phase and you start grinding with whatever discoveries you made. Is that something you would say is pretty accurate?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with that. I just think that the main thing is not to kind of get stuck into a play style and feel like you can never change it, because I do think there are times when I do think there are times when something that you've done for a long time, just it doesn't work for you, whether it's like a mental thing, or it's just not comfortable for your hands anymore. I think that it's good to be open-minded to to changes in your play style, and just kind of to always have that, because my play style's definitely changed a lot over the years. My grips changed heavily over the years. My area used to be absolutely tiny. Now I think it's fairly normal now. Um, so I think it's good to just have an open mind about, you're not gonna immediately become 5 times worse if you change your play style, especially if you're used to changing play style. I think you can learn to adapt quickly when you change play styles.
Were there any reasons why you decided to switch your area?
Um, I mean, a lot of the times it's kind of there were a lot of times where it was kind of on a whim, where it's just like I like maybe during a period where I'm just playing really badly for some reason. I'm like, oh, maybe I'll try a slightly different area, whether it's a different position or maybe slightly bigger, and I would try that. There was I think one specific combination of both area and grip that I did change, because after a certain amount of time, I started noticing like some pretty like severe hand pain. So that's another aspect, is like, again, with how stuff that's worked before might not work anymore. Like I realized, like, oh well, I've got to change because this isn't working like physically anymore.
Ah,
So
so
I think there's been different reasons why.
somewhat related to grip as well. Do you have any experience with like finding your grip, or I guess losing your grip either in the middle of a map or the middle of a session, or sometimes between sessions. Is that something you've experienced before and like kind of have some insight on?
Yeah, definitely. Uh, I think my grips throughout the year, my grips have been different, and some of them have had better stability in terms of over long term, and some of them haven't. I would say definitely for the past few years, my grip has felt really comfortable, but at the same time, there's definitely an element of like pen slip and it changing over the course of a map, and it's definitely hindered certain aspects of my gameplay.
Is grip tape something you've experimented with at all before?
Um, I I've tried once or twice. It didn't do much for me, and I've tried a couple things. I've tried grip tape on my pen, I think once. I tried using one of those like tablet gloves. I've tried
Oh,
using
yeah.
that before. Um, and I've used different like tablet covers as well. I do think the whole grip tape thing, it's definitely not something that's worked for me. It makes the pen. There was more con than pro in that situation because it made the pen feel weird, and it didn't really help in terms of like keeping it in the same position in my hand.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, and I think that's also one of those things that's definitely, I think, goes to show that experimenting with this sort of stuff for yourself can often give a lot of value because sometimes like it's like you can hear opinions of many different players on like different settings or things like that, but really trying it out for yourself is going to give you the most accurate answer for yourself because and I think this grip tape thing is actually a good example because there's many players that swear by grip tape and it's like I
Yeah, yeah,
remember
definitely.
Vaxe had a stream where he was like popping off and getting like score after score after score and his stream title was just like I found more grip tape something like that and I think your sort of like kind of opposite experience with that is a really good example that like that's not like pretty much nothing in this game is one size fits all, which I
Right.
think is actually part of the beauty of this game as well. So
Oh yeah, definitely.
yeah, I think it's
Oh yeah,
yeah.
I see that in the chat thing, Psyche mentioned the anti sweat stuff, which is an interesting point. I haven't used what's that, the one that Recticon part is called, was it like gamer goo? Was that what it was?
That that sounds like it would be
It, it's a,
okay.
it's a weird name, but I think that's what it's
Yeah,
called.
okay, it
But it's
is
like
actually.
an anti slip thing. I think it's meant for like mouse or stuff like pen. Um, I don't know. I don't have experience with that.
Dang, Gamer
So
Goo. That's a crazy brand name. They
yeah, I
really
know.
okay. That's funny. Oh, yeah, okay, that's a good point. It's like similar to like chalk for rock climbing, but for gaming basically.
Yeah, I might try that at some point. It seems like a better option for someone like me than something like tape because it's less of like a thing on the pen, and it's more of just like a coating on like your hands kind of a
Yeah,
thing.
that actually makes sense. So going back to speed for a little bit, I'm curious
Mhm.
about tapping styles in the sense of like single tap versus alternating. Is there, I guess, any initial thoughts that come to mind when I mention those things for pushing speed?
Well, I definitely have a lot more experience on single tapping than alternating. Um, Basically from the beginning, I just naturally ended up single tapping, and that's kind of what I stuck with. I would say the only branch out I've had into alternating is because I was kind of forced to in terms of like tournament play, because a lot of maps are just not single tappable in that, and sometimes it's just better to opt for alternating in that. In terms of speed, I think there's not really any kind of clear cut advantage between the two, or oh, this one should be used instead of that one, or like this one is inherently better. I would say that there are certain things like Obviously, if you get to stuff like 300 plus BPM, you might have an easier time if you're good at alternating. There are differences like that, but when it comes to just raw like improving in speed, you can. I think you can just you could get really good at speed in whatever you decide to do. Like there's plenty of speed players who are good using either one. So I think there's no inherent like advantage to either one.
Yeah, that I definitely agree with. And also that like some maps kind of feel like they favor one style over the other.
Yeah. I definitely feel that too.
Someone named Kurium, just to sort of expand on this topic again, they asked, is there an actual way to improve single tap speed? I've single tapped since I started playing the game and I haven't seen any improvement. I'm still hard stuck around 240 BPM, which just isn't good enough. Any player I've seen that manually single taps has been good since the beginning.
Hmm. Well, first to address players that you see single tap being good since the beginning. That's not accurate because nobody's really good at it from the beginning. I mean, a lot of the people you're probably saying have just been doing it for a long time. So you're saying that. Improving it, I mean, the way I improved it was just I just never alternated on anything. Like regardless of what it was, I would pretty much always try to single tap it. And I think that eventually just kind of worked out for me. And it kind of worked in tandem with, improving my speed. Because like as I kept getting faster in terms of stream speed, I think my single tap kind of grew in tandem with that.
I'm glad you mentioned that first bit because I thought the same thing where they said it's like everyone that they see who single taps has been good since the beginning, where I would suspect that the majority of players that you see that are single tapping, especially top players, most of them like you only started right like you only started seeing their scores after they were really good. Like that's why you started seeing them in the first place. So
Right, exactly.
it's this tricky sort of like mental thing where the your first exposure to a player is when they're already really good, and so it can be tempting to feel like they've always been good because that's what you've always seen from them. But
Right, yeah.
yeah, I think that's I'm glad you caught that because that definitely stood out to me as well. But yeah, I think
I
you can go.
but I will mention really quickly though that like you don't have to feel like trapped in one play style. Like it's obviously it's a big time sink to kind of relearn a tapping play style, but I think that if you work on different play styles, like working on alternating, maybe as well if you want to still single tap as well, but then invest time in alternating, then that's a good idea because it's you always try to find solutions to your problems, and if you find a solution that works, like switching your playstyle to try to circumvent that, I think it's a good idea to at least try that out.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely agree with that. And just aside from that, obviously there's the aspect of being willing to, I guess, switch and experiment with different things if you feel like it's helpful, which is basically what you're mentioning. But also that, like sometimes, and you've described this kind of earlier, where it's like you feel like you're just not getting anywhere at all, but sort of continuing to trust the process, basically, and keep practicing until you're able to push past that wall. Like sometimes there are things you might need to change, but oftentimes you just really need to keep pushing, and it might take longer than you want, but it probably won't take as long as you think if you're consistent with your practice.
Right.
So, someone named Zoriku asked, "How much does Jakson strain while playing speed slash trying to improve speed?"
It depends on what I'm playing. I would say in general, if I'm trying to push like my BPM, kind of like fast BPM skill cap, there is definitely a lot of strain, and obviously I think that that's what should happen if you're playing higher and higher BPMs. Is you're gonna be straining a lot through it until it becomes a little bit easier, and then you try to push a little bit more. um I would say that there's almost different kinds of strains for me when it comes to speed, because there's a just like how I feel like there's a difference in kind of the style that you play, really fast stuff versus pretty slower stuff. um I feel like when I'm playing stuff that's really fast, it's it's a different kind of strain, I feel, than when I'm doing stuff that's really slow. And in addition to that, I think that a really good skill to learn is learning at what points in a map do you need to strain versus places where you don't. Because if you can figure out patterns that you don't need to strain on in order to hit, and you can learn how to hit them without straining, it's really good for preserving for the moments that are hard that you do need to strain on.
Oh, that honestly, that what that reminds me of is mouse players who mentioned that in order to combat mouse drift, like being able to recognize patterns where you can pick up your mouse and kind of readjust it. And I'm sort of hearing the same thing from you, where like learning to recognize patterns where you know you don't need to strain, so you can kind of preserve your stamina and like stamina, I guess, for those times where you really do need it.
Right, exactly.
And I'm curious, you mentioned you sort of have like different types of strain on high BPM versus low BPM. Are there like locations on your like arm or hand or wherever that you can kind of pinpoint as a general area for you specifically? So obviously this might differ from person to person, but just so people maybe get an idea from one person's perspective of like where that strain is sort of located on both high and low BPM.
Yeah, so I think depending on what kind of VPM I'm doing, there's like a couple different spots in the whole entirety of my arm that end up feeling the strain. There's there's strain in the fingers, I would say, strain in the wrist, and then strain in the forearm or bicep area. And I think those three are different ones that I experience at different points. Um, I would say when it comes to really long streams, like stuff that really is like pure stamina and not speed intensive, there ends up being a lot of burn in like kind of the whole arm area. Whereas I feel like when I do like high BPM bursts, there's a lot more strain on my fingers and wrists.
Ah, interesting. And then for lower BPM, is there like a certain spot, especially because you mentioned like when you're playing alternating maps, or I assume if there's like a lot of aim control required as well on lower BPM stuff?
Right, yeah. I would say it's pretty similar. It's pretty similar to, now that I think about it, it's almost a combination of both. Almost because I feel like really low BPM, because there's a lot more like it feels more like alternating. But then if it's a really long stream, it's also, you know it's got that burn in the arm as well. So I think it's a lot of times stuff that's lower is kind of a mix, because it's kind of utilizing both of them.
Ah, okay, that actually makes sense. Zoriku responded again. They said, "I fingerlock a lot while straining. Is fingerlock something that you've experienced or had to deal with much before? And do you have any
uh
sort of advice for this person?"
yeah, I definitely I've had my issues with finger lock. It's definitely the two situations where it happens the most are either when I'm running out of stamina, or I've kind of just hit a BPM cap where I can't really consistently hit patterns anymore. So if I'm kind of at the end of my rope, I'll obviously, like, what ends up happening is my muscles move less. It doesn't My fingers won't go up high enough, and so it drops inputs. And then on the other spectrum, obviously at some point my fingers just can't move fast enough.
So I just went to your profile and I discovered this text that says abusive relationship with Osu. Is that something you can elaborate on at all?
Yeah, there's definitely periods of time in this game where I felt that it's pretty like detrimental to my kind of just my mental view of kind of the game in general. Um, whether it's because I'm in like a bad spot in terms of skill wise, or regardless of what's going on, there have been times where I kind of ignored kind of red flags in terms of my mental during play that I kind of just tried to ignore. Um, and of course, that's definitely the point which I would recommend if you feel that way, that you take a break. And that's also definitely happened with me a few times. Just sometimes you just need a break from all of it. Um, but I've definitely had struggles with playing, regardless of the fact that I'm not having fun. I'm always frustrated. You know there's definitely been that.
Are there any mental lessons, I guess, or like mindset lessons that you've learned from Osu that you feel like have applied even outside the game?
um oh man, I mean, I think I've had a lot of introspect on kind of almost kind of like self-worth kind of feelings, because I've always been a very competitive person, and not even to the extent of like wanting to beat other people. It's almost competitive to an extent of wanting to beat my own expectations of myself. And while sometimes it's a good motivator for what I do, other times it's a very
Like
it's
vicious
it's a
cycle.
thing. Yeah, it's something that I've struggled with, because it can get into a bad cycle, because if you set expectations for yourself and you don't meet them, it kind of just gets worse until you kind of have to take a step back and like assess that assess that kind of mindset. And yeah, I think it's been a lot of just learning to not be so hard on yourself when you don't meet your own expectations for yourself.
Ah, yeah, that's actually. Do you feel like? Well, I guess you kind of answered this, but do you feel certain pressure, especially? I mean, okay. Do you feel pressure from expectations that kind of other people set on you, or does that not really come into play?
Um, it has affected me before, especially with how much like things like such as like a tournament play that I've been involved in a lot more recently. It's definitely, especially if I'm on a team, I feel like I have to pull my weight uh in something like that. But I think because of how much I put on myself, my the thing on the forefront of my mind has always kind of been my own view of myself, just because I think it's in general, I've realized that my own expectations are a lot higher than people around me. And I also think that it's good not to obviously it's good not to have expectations of yourself too high as well. But I think not worrying about what other people think of your performance is also a good thing to realize, is that other people shouldn't determine how well you play.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I would agree with that. On a somewhat similar note, have you had experience dealing with nerve control both in solo and also in tournaments? And are there any strategies that you have for dealing with nerves?
Ooh. I mean, ooh, yeah, I've had a lot of issues with nerve control. I mean, honestly, if anyone else has some tips for me, I'd be open to that because I myself have definitely struggled with that, and I still do. It still is hard for me to deal with even now. Um, there's definitely an aspect of like when it comes to like solo, um, there's a lot of like a lot of thoughts that kind of end up just kind of running through your head. Things like oh, seeing your accuracy and seeing that's really good. So then you start thinking that you really don't want to lose your accuracy, or thinking like, if I FC, this play is going to be worth this much. Those are all things that kind of just subconsciously kind of whisk through your mind in the middle of a play, and I think
Right.
that has that affects me a lot. And when it comes to like tournaments, it's a similar thing of like, you don't want to lose, and then especially things like during breaks, you see the scores, that affects nerves a lot. um
Oh, yep.
and I definitely, it definitely shows in my gameplay nerves. There's a lot more tensing that happens, a lot more cursor shake, much a very very high heart rate, which
Oh,
I do actually have a little story about, if you don't mind the segue
oh
into kind of
no, go
a
for it.
little a little random story
Go
about.
for it.
There was one time where I was really really close to like full on passing out because of a play.
Oh my god.
Um, I don't remember. Don't remember the exact map. I could probably look for it, but I remember it was a few years ago, and I think at the time my top play must have been like a Hitamari 700. I think that was my top play, and this play that I did, it was a really short map, so like I had no time to like not get like the nerves kind of just hit in the middle of the map because I had retried like a ton of times.
Oh,
And so it's like when you retry a ton on like on a short map, and you kind of you get past that spot that you're stuck on, like the nerves would really just hit. And I think like if I had FC, the play would have been like 880 pp or something like that.
oh my god.
um
Was
so
it
when it
Hank's back?
what
Was it Hank's
no
back?
no it was I think it was one of the short versions of my narco
Oh, yeah. I'm
my
going.
narco
I'm going through
addiction, I
most
think it's
played.
called.
Yeah, yeah. My narco addiction.
It was one of those, and I'd FC'd through like 3/4 of the map, and I started getting really really nervous, and then I missed a couple times, but then after the play was over, like I really had to like I had to like really calm myself because I was like, that's probably like the most like kind of immediate stress I've felt in like a play, and it happened like really quickly.
Oh
So it
my
was
god,
like,
that sounds crazy.
so yeah, there's my nerve control for you.
Yeah. If I had to give my 2 cents on nerve control, I would probably say, and I think especially in your case, the two biggest factors that usually are at play are expectations and this sort of feeling that you have something to lose. And they
Right?
they
Yeah.
somewhat go hand in hand because like let's say you have this expectation that you're decent at like 6 stars, but then 7 stars is pretty hard for you, and then 4 stars, 3 stars is like super super easy, and 5 stars. So if seeing a 4 star something that's super easy for you, then it's like you obviously you could be SSing, and it's like you don't feel like you have anything to lose because it's like, okay, well, I can just, if I mess up, just like whatever, I'll do it again, and chances are you won't mess up in the first place. So you kind of have that balance, like the expectations, and also just kind of not feeling like you have anything to lose. And then on the opposite side of the spectrum, it's like this unfortunate thing that's almost like, I don't know who coded this into the human species, but it's like when you're nervous or like when you feel like you have something to lose, like your fine motor control gets really, really bad, which is not really ideal for something like Osu. So
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think that's also something that, like, if nothing else, nerve control is one of those things that, like, if you're able to recognize where it's coming from, at least in my experience, that's been one of the most helpful things for kind of getting to the root of it and being like, like, where are these expectations even coming from? Or like, why is it that I feel like I have something to lose? Kind of like going therapist mode on yourself and being able to ask yourself those questions and kind of get to the root of it. And that can often have some pretty high benefit in my experience.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think also there's almost like I feel like a way that can help it in my experience. Obviously, I still struggle with it, but it's something that's helped is almost like the kind of like the phrasing of the way you think of certain situations where say you're playing solo and you're like in the middle of an FC on something, then instead of thinking something along the lines of like if I miss I will, lose this FC, I'll lose the PP,
Oh, yeah.
I'll lose the, like instead of that, just switching opposite, like not lying to yourself and saying like, oh, like I will FC, not saying something like that, but instead taking the situation, turning it into a positive, such as like maybe like, wow, I've already beat my old scores combo by this much, or like this amount of score is already like really good, or like this spot on the leaderboard, like I got in the leaderboards already, like turning the exact same spot that you're in into something that's like a good thing regardless of what happens is, I think, a way that you can kind of help it, because it's hard to kind of completely get rid of like the thought of where you're at in a map. So I think if you kind of try to train yourself to, when you think of it, to think of it in like a positive light instead, I think that would probably help a lot.
That, yeah, I think that is definitely worded very beautifully because that's essentially the strategy that I use as well, where it's like the way I think of it is that you can't really control certain thoughts from coming up. Like if you're on an FC run on a top play map, then you can't really help but kind of recognize that unless you just don't know the map's value. But that's very, very rare. But yeah, I think one mindset that I've kind of adopted actually really, really early on, like relatively, as far as like my understanding of nerve control is I just kind of have this mindset that you have to choke your way to the scores that you want. That's kind of what I tell myself every single time. I like just have 10 chokes on a map that are just in random different spots. And it's like, well, instead of kind of beating myself up about it, I just kind of try to tell myself that like that's just kind of how the process is and that one of these scores, one of these runs is going to be the one. So
Right, right. That's definitely another part. It's just like, missing is not the end of it, right? Because I mean, you're not going anywhere, the map's not going anywhere. Like it's always there for you to try again. So it's like, if you miss, then so what?
right. Yeah, you got an extra 2 minutes of practice in the game. So,
Exactly.
all right. Do you have any sort of, I guess, oh, actually, I'm curious if you have any like things that seemed like they should have been really obvious to you, but that kind of took a while for you to figure out,
Hmm.
either with like any of your game settings or like getting into a certain skill set or like even things related to reading or anything like that.
Um, one thing is that uh, I for the probably the first couple years of me playing the game, I was very much like disconnected from like the wider OSU community. Like the extent of my exposure to pretty much the entire community was like, maybe one small private Discord server with a couple friends, and the occasional like watching circle people videos on YouTube for plays. Um, so I think one thing is like I never really thought about the fact that there were a lot of like skill sets and play styles just in general. Like I don't think I'd ever thought of like low AR reading for probably years after I started playing. I never even thought about the fact that, maybe a low AR reading, hidden reading, like I didn't acknowledge the fact that that like existed almost.
Oh, interesting. Thing. Yeah, I feel like that is, if nothing else, that could be something that some players like kind of get caught up in as well when they're relatively new. Like they might feel super overwhelmed by, especially if they want to get into tournaments from a really early level, and they start looking at like how map pools are structured, and it's like all these skill sets, and especially as a new player, if you kind of feel like you're not super experienced at any of them, it can be kind of overwhelming. But in your experience, it sort of seems like you stuck to the basics for a long, long time and kind of just stuck with whatever was fun for you. And then once you reached a certain point, you started branching out a lot from there when you did start playing tournaments. But yeah, I would definitely seems like having that starting foundation was really, really valuable for you.
Yeah, I think that I'm pretty thankful that I didn't get too like involved into kind of like the more like advanced or nuanced things about the game until later, because I definitely was kind of on this track of just, what I thought was the game was how I played the game. And then once I got to a point where I was like, I feel pretty good about this, then, it's starting to branch out and try to look for other things. I think that was definitely a positive in the way I played. I definitely think that's something that has kind of gone away over time, is this like, trying to figure out the game yourself before you go to everyone else for their opinion on what the game is like.
Oh yeah,
Because there's definitely there's no objective way to play the game, and obviously people with experience are going to find a lot more of the nuance of a game, and because they understand more about it. So I think more players nowadays, like I wish there was more of like a culture behind, letting people who are newer to the game experience it for themselves first, instead of trying to throw so much like complex information at them.
oh yeah, yeah. I definitely agree with that. I think, and there's been, I think, Aryu is someone who is pretty vocal about this opinion, where it's like part of the fun of the game, and this is kind of what you're talking about as well. Like the part of the fun, especially as a newer player, is kind of discovering everything for yourself and kind of having your own journey through the game. So yeah, definitely agreed with that. Are there
Yeah,
any? Oh yeah, yeah,
I
go.
mean, I even sorry. I even like I find myself always thinking about, because like over time, like it's kind of been generally the same feeling of like, if I get good scores or if I like increase in PP or rank, like that's kind of been like the same feeling. But it's like, it's the same feeling but on a different level, right? Because it's like, getting a 300 PP is a 5 digit, you know, in your view will be the same as once you get to, 3 digit and you get like a 600, 700 play. Like it's the same feeling. So then I always go back to kind of the very, very start, because that's really the only like different unique feeling that was ever part of like my gameplay, right? Because at the beginning there's a lot of sense of like wonder, like what is this, what is that, how does
Right.
that work, and sometimes I kind of wish I could go back, like if I could go back to having no experience with the game, I I honestly would, just because that kind of first stage of like learning everything was like really, it was like almost like profound, because it's like after that it's kind of like a cycle after that.
Yeah, yeah. It's like you can never do something again from the beginning, basically.
Right.
Yeah. Do you have any sort of last either opinions or wisdom that you'd like to share with everyone as we wrap up?
I'm curious about one thing with you. When did you? What was it that first got you into the game?
So I've started seeing it. So I used to watch a lot of League of Legends streamers, and every now and then people would play it during queue. And at first, for me, it was just like another one of those random games that people would play during queue. But then
Right.
one time I was just on a random stream in the league like directory on Twitch, and someone was playing this circle game like in queue, and the chat was going crazy. Chat was like, "OMG, Pog champ! Like his Asian is showing. OMG, he's so good." And then I was sitting there. It was like a school night, and I was like, you know, what the heck is this game called? It doesn't look that hard. So it doesn't look as hard as these guys are making it out to be. So I like scrolled through the chat and someone mentioned the game name is called OSU. So I made an account and then I promptly went to sleep because I had school the next day. But yeah, I remember before I did get off my computer, I at least installed the game and I like moved my cursor around the menu just to sort of like get a feel for what it felt like. And I remember distinctly feeling like it kind of felt a little smoother than I had even initially expected. So yeah, I had a pretty good first impression with just that. I was like, dang, this game feels like pretty smooth to try. So yeah, that was basically my first experience. And then like a month later, I had mentioned it to a couple of my school friends who I played League with. And one of them was like, "Oh yeah, I downloaded that recently, but I haven't really played it much." And I was like, "OMG, me too." So yeah, that was basically my beginning of playing Osu.
Wow, yeah, that's interesting. I feel like that's not like a very common like origin story. Is like the whole discovering it through like a different community on something like Twitch.
Oh really? I mean, I actually I feel like I've heard a lot of people say that they found out about it, maybe not through Twitch directly, but through like
Oh
playing
wait,
other games.
you know what? You're right because there's definitely a lot of the aim trainer
Yeah,
discovery
yeah,
thing.
yeah.
Right? Yeah, that's a thing. Because the way I discovered it, I think it when I the first time I was exposed to Osu was Ed's never played Osu again
Oh yeah,
video.
the big black joke.
Yeah, and it was like a random recommendation, and I saw it. I was like, what is this game? Uh, and then I downloaded it, and then I remember I played it like that day, and and maybe like the next day I played it for like maybe half an hour or so, played a couple maps, and then I didn't touch the game again until about 9 months later when, funnily enough, I saw the exact same video again in my
Oh,
recommended. And so I saw the video again and I'm like, wait, I remember this game. And then I logged back onto the game and that's where like it actually started.
oh, dang! Wait, that's super
So I,
interesting.
I, I discovered the game through the same video twice.
Oh, what the heck? Oh, so I assume you like tried it and you were like, okay, I've given it a decent shot, and then you kind of just forgot about it.
Yeah. I don't know why I kind of just I played for a couple days and then just stopped.
All
But
right,
then I guess the second time it just kind of clicked and I started playing.
dang. I'm curious your thoughts on like Osu as a game compared to I guess other games that you've played, either like by the nature of the game itself or the community or anything like that.
Yeah, there's a couple. Like one thing, obviously, something that drew me in pretty early. I would say at least like maybe a couple months in was the idea of the PP system. Because I kind of joined within a couple of years after PPV2. Because was that 2015 that started?
Yeah, yeah.
Right. So I made my account 2016, but then I started playing early 2017. So that seeing that was kind of like an instant draw, I think, after playing for a little while, because as of yet I haven't really ever seen a game attempt to make like in like a attempt to make like an accurate like solo play ranking in like a game, because a lot of games have like competitive competitive
Oh
play and
yeah.
like ranks and all that. But I've never really seen another game like really strive for like the system of you play solo and then like an algorithm tries to detect where that is in accordance with everyone else.
Yeah, that's
And
a
I think
good point.
that's something that like I think immediately drew me to the game and kind of like stuck me with, like, I don't think I would have played the game, uh, if not as much as I did, then even like at all, if that system had not existed in some form.
All
Uh,
right. As opposed to like kind of matchmaking like other games.
yeah, like matchmaking with ranks, or how a lot of games they might have like a leaderboard of like how much someone has played, but that's not like a real like indicator of who's like, oh, who's the best in the game kind of thing. So I think
Right.
that was like an immediate draw.
Dang, that's actually really interesting. And then I assume, well, you did mention that like the community isn't something you were super involved in for a while.
Yeah, definitely at first. So I think the whole PP system was like the biggest draw for me in the beginning. But one thing that I definitely noticed later about the whole game is just how, especially when it comes to standard, how much of like an international kind of phenomenon it is.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Because a lot of like a lot of AAA titles are obviously international, but they're different in the sense that it's very disconnected between like country communities because it's like you know different like servers that
Right.
are region based, and each kind of like community sticks to their own like region almost in a sense. And then there's things like a lot of other rhythm games are very like just looking at examples like the rankings for all the other modes just in Osu are kind of more skewed
Oh, yep.
in terms of countries. Like Taiko's a very like Japanese like rhythm game, very popular in like Japanese culture, so it's like there's a lot of Japanese players, that kind of thing.
Right, right.
So I remember like just looking at like top ranks and being like, man, there are people from like every corner of the world that are like involved all together, are involved in like the community and are at the top of the rankings. Like it's very interesting how much more kind of connected globally a game like Osu is compared to pretty much anything else.
Yeah, that's actually it's something I've thought about, but not quite to the extent that you just mentioned it. So yeah, that's really interesting, especially with like most other games. Like it does get played in every region or a lot of regions, but they're separated by servers because you have to play live matchmaking or whatever. So yeah,
Right.
I think there's this like very unique aspect of Osu where it's like everyone's on their own solo individual journey, and yeah, I think the community is definitely much more supportive than many others out there.
Yeah. I think there's also, just to mention that I think that itself is tells a lot about like both positive and negative things about the community. Just because it's like, I think when you throw so many different like cultures and mindsets together, there's a lot of good interaction, and there's a lot of obviously there's a lot of like whether it's drama or negative views of stuff. I think part of that is actually because of how many like different people, different parts of the world are interacting with each other.
Ah, that's actually a good point. That's definitely true. Just like many different, like I guess disagreements, if nothing else.
Right. I think I've always thought that was one of the pretty big reasons why like the community, like Osu as a community, is seen as like very divisive and like very controversial. Is just because it's like, when you look at it as a whole, it's really just, it's like it's everyone, like it's it's everyone from every kind of part of the world. So it's bound to happen, I guess.
Right, and it's also like there's really only like there's one central like place to go for a lot of things. Like there's one central like subreddit where like even the developers and ever like anyone who has an opinion about the game kind of goes to the same place, as opposed to other regions or just other games in general that are really really big, and you sometimes only have like subsections of like subsections of the community to kind of see people's opinions.
Yeah, yeah. Osu is a very like Osu is like a super subculture like community
Yeah,
of
for sure.
like the amount of like Discord servers that are between different players and the amount of like kind of like groups that are made. It's interesting.
Yeah, I think my favorite part about Osu compared to other games is that like everyone kind of knows everyone else, and I think the just the ability to like reach out to people in the top rankings and just kind of like literally send them a message is something that's really unheard of in a lot of other games.
Yeah, that reminds me of like when I was lower rank and like trying to send messages to like higher rank people, and like they'd respond, and I would be like dumbfounded. I'll be like, Whoa, that's crazy.
Yeah.
And now that happens to me. Like random people message me, and I'm like, I wonder why this person's messaging me. I'm like, oh right, I'm like top 200.
Oh yeah. That's funny. But yeah, I think that's dang. Actually, did not expect so much profound insight about the community and just sort of everything in general. So, oh my gosh, thanks Jackson for your time and for your ultimate wisdom from your glowing happy face son.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on this. This was great. It was a good experience. I've never really gone in depth into a lot of this, so I appreciate the opportunity to do it.
Oh yeah, yeah. And do you have any places where people can find you and reach out to you aside from your OSU profile?
Yeah, I would say the platform I'm usually most active on is just here on Discord. Other than that, um, unfortunately, Twitter is I check Twitter quite a bit, so I'm on there.
Oh,
It's at Jackson Ranger, same as it is in Discord. Remember not to do the C. There's no C in the name. You know, a
oh
lot of people
yes.
when they first hear me get that wrong. There's no C in the name. But yeah, Jackson Ranger on Twitter, Jackson Ranger on Twitch. Someone put that, Psyche put that in the chat there. Um, Jackson Ranger on YouTube as well.
Oh, where did
Um,
that name come from, by the way? As a final question.
but the whole thing, Jackson Ranger.
Both.
Right. So the Ranger part of it, like the second part of it, um, is is I'll say it's a pretty. All right, I do actually have a Discord. Technically, it's kind of dead, but the Ranger part of it was very random. That was made when I was I want to say like 7 or 8 years old. It was made by my dad when I was making like an Xbox Live profile,
Oh,
and Jackson was like the main nickname. I'll get to that in a sec, but like obviously it's too short of like a name to not be taken on pretty much anything.
right.
Um, so for like me and my like siblings, we just had to come up with kind of like random words that would allow it to be taken. So I think Ranger just kind of spawned just kind of out of nowhere, just as an addition to it. So it became Jackson Ranger. Um, in terms of the Jackson name, there's a little bit more meaning behind it in that this might come as a shocker to some people. My name is not Jackson. Like that is
Oh my
not my
God.
name.
How
um,
could you?
the reason that it's Jackson is that, and also the reason why there's no C in the name is because JAK are my initials.
Ah.
Um, so then Jackson just kind of rolled off the tongue for that as like a nickname with like a meaning behind it. So
Oh, that's
that's
interesting.
why Jackson exists and why it doesn't have a C.
Ah,
It-
okay, that actually makes sense.
yeah.
All right.
People are shocked when they hear that my name is not actually Jackson.
Well, I think that's a very wholesome story to end things off. But thanks again, Jackson, for taking the time to answer all these questions. And thanks everyone for listening as well.
Yes, of course. Thank you for having me.
All right. Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Woo, we will see you all next time.
See you guys.